Envy, Pastor Mike Fabarez says, is frustration. Welcome to Grace and Truth with Owen Strachan. My name is, in fact, Owen Strachan, and I am joined today by Pastor Mike Fabarez, Senior Pastor of Compass Bible Church in Aliso Viejo, California. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Man, this is so fun. This is my first live podcast I have done in person on Grace and Truth.
Well, that's the way to do it. Let's start it. Let's make it happen.
I had to call in a hitter for this first occasion.
Well, that's good. It's good to have you in person. We're not through the computer. I love it. Yeah.
It's true. It's not on Zoom.
Yeah, that's good.
So you say envy is frustration in the course of this excellent new book. It's out November 7, 2023. Could you just unpack what you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot of sin where there's some kind of carrot hanging out there where you get some kind of, delight, some kind of buzz, some kind of something. But, envy is just really nothing but frustration. And it's funny because as a sin, as others have rightly pointed out, it really has no payoff. It's got nothing, nothing to entice us, really. It's just the corruption of our hearts and our minds when we are frustrated with what other people are doing, and we'd like to be doing that, or other people have, we'd like to have that. We really have to sort out the words jealousy, covetousness. Envy fits in there, but it really is at the top of all of that in terms of doing the most damage, right? Covetousness is this desire for something I don't have, right? That's the 10th commandment, right? You're not supposed to covet, anything your neighbor has. That's the bottom line there. And then jealousy, I can be jealous of someone, and I can do it in a sinful way. There's a right kind of jealousy, obviously, that God has for us, we should have for our spouse. But the kind of jealousy we have when we think, well, someone's got something and they're doing something, I wish I were doing that. But envy is like another layer on top of it all. It's like I'm craving what you have, what you do, the followers that you have, the podcast you have, the church you have, whatever it might be. And now I want what you have, but now I really resent you for having it, right? Cain kills Abel, which is more than just, I wish I were accepted and had the good sacrifice here, but I don't like that you have it, and now I hate you because you have what I don't have. And, as Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, so much work is done under heaven that's motivated and driven by envy. Envy is this corrosive internal drive to outdo someone. We don't like what they have. We don't like the applause they have. We don't like the beauty they have. We don't like the talent they have. We don't like the success they have. And if we get a chance to take a dig at them verbally, we'll do it because it really is this bitterness toward a person for their accomplishments. And then I just think there's so many aspects to it, and that's what I try to unpack in this book, is just trying to get us to think of all the different tentacles of envy that really destroys a church, it destroys a small group, it destroys even my experience of rejoicing in someone's vacation on Facebook or Instagram. We start to really have a resentment for other people that have what we'd like to have.
But it's, as you say, it's resentment passed into some kind of vengeance. It's not just, envy itself is not just, I'm dissatisfied, that's a real sin too, covetousness or whatever. Right. But it's that plus more. And so when you're finding yourself wrapped in envy, when you're looking at the person who has the thing you want to have but don't have, and you not only want that, but you, in a kind of Cain-like way, as you alluded to, you almost want to do them harm. Yeah. You do want to do them harm. That's right. Let's not qualify it. Yeah. That's a pretty dark thing to think about, but it's true.
Right. First murder in the Bible, right, is motivated by envy. Jesus was delivered over. Pilate could see it because they were envious of Jesus. He was packing out not just homes and hillsides, but even there in Jerusalem, right? They're lining up to cheer him on. And the Pharisees, the leaders, the scribes, the Sadducees, they couldn't handle it. It's not just that we got to work harder to grow our synagogues here, or we need to work harder to do something to get the people to give us a hearing the way people are giving Jesus a hearing. It's like we got to do something to shut him up. And while today we're probably not going to kill someone, I don't think the readers of this book are, I'm trying to prevent them from crucifying anybody, but we do a lot of character assassination because we don't like that someone else has got something going on that we'd prefer to have. And if you start looking for the symptoms, like how do I speak about that person who's got a bigger ministry than me? And I just think of in our case in terms of people trying to minister for the Lord, right? We'd like to do that selflessly, and it wouldn't matter, what our neighbor was doing, right? We'd love to see them succeed. It's kind of like a relationship you have with your son, right? I got 2 sons, you've got a son. We really genuinely want them to do well, and we'd like them to do better than us in life, right? And I think that's a sincere desire that God implants in us to have a kind of love for our kids that's very hard to replicate with our contemporaries, our peers, right? When they start doing better than us, right? All of a sudden now I get critical. I start to find the holes in their lives. I try to find the problems, right? If a gal's at church and another gal's there that gets complimented in front of her for her dress on Easter morning or something, right? She's going to look to try and give her that slanted look of, well, I don't know, she's not the woman you think she is, right? Or whatever. There's instantly this critical spirit that can easily creep into our thinking where we start to we look askance at people. We start to look critically at them. We start to be suspicious of them. And it just really ruins a lot in our personal relationships.
In Romans 12, we hear the Apostle Paul say that we need to rejoice with those who rejoice. It strikes me in listening to your presentation and reading your excellent book. I got to endorse it and strongly commend it. And I'm not sure that's really fair to do because it was such a convicting book to endorse in a really good way. I'm being silly. I loved it. But it strikes me that envy is basically, well, tell me what you think, a failure of rejoicing with someone who has something to rejoice in. God gave them that. That's not an evil thing. They should rejoice in God's gift, but it's not rejoicing in what God has given them. It's the opposite.
No, think about it. And just to go back to the analogy of your son, right? If your son or my son does better, they're a better little league hitter than we were, right? We rejoice with them. They're thrilled that they hit their 5th home run this season, and if we hit 2 in our whole career, right? We sincerely rejoice with his rejoicing, and it's much like 1 Corinthians 13 says, right, love, it does not envy, right? I don't have that if I truly love. Yeah. That's why a lot of the second half of the book is all going to deal with, do we really have a heart that has cultivated a love that can rejoice with someone else's success? Yeah. And not someone who is, half our size, but someone who's just across from us at the office, or someone who's just down the street from us, who's got a better lawn and a better car and, a prettier wife, or whatever we might think about them and doing well. And you can see where that goes back to that Exodus 10th commandment. I can start by saying, I wish I had that, right? I can have a covetousness that steals my contentment, and that's bad enough, right? That's the core of this. But now when I start resenting him for it, when I wouldn't mind, just dumping my coffee on his grass, right? Now all of a sudden, you've just envy has just crept up, and now I don't like this guy. And it's like, why do I not like him? For the blessing that he's received. I don't rejoice with him and his beautiful lawn and his beautiful car and his big house and the big add-on he did, and he had the cash to pay for it, or whatever it might be. And I just think the closer it is to home, the more possible this is, right? And I footnote this in the book, but a great book, insightful book that really opened that up to me, that envy is never a sin like far away. It's always a sin nearby. It's not like I watch somebody in the major leagues that I don't know hit home runs, and I'm not envious of them, right? Because I'm not their peer, but it's the guy sitting right next to me in the stands that I go to work with or school with or church with. That's the guy that I'm tempted to envy. It's always the people that I feel like are in my sphere, not the guy that's out there, not the celebrity.
Yeah, you raised the issue of your driveway and its root problem in a few places, and absolutely cracked me up. One of the things I love about the book is the humor you slip in throughout it, and that's true of your ministry in general, your preaching. I love that. But that's so emblematic, I think, of this discussion, because you weren't talking about, the, $25 million mansion in Newport Beach, and that's the envy problem. It's like your neighbor doesn't have this root problem, and you had to battle it. That's envy to me. Envy is I guess in a nutshell or very simply, it's not focusing on what God has given you. It's focusing on what you don't have and someone else has. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the problem, is that until we start looking over the fence of our lives and starting to desire what we don't have, right? And really contentment is about learning to love what we do have. But when we start hankering for stuff that we don't have, that's when the opportunity is there for this. And I mean, you're an expert in this. This goes beyond just our relationships. When we look at society, right? You think of critical race theory, things you've written on so insightfully. That really didn't happen if it's not fueled by a societal, right, envy. Right, I should have what they have, and I'm angry that they have what I don't have, whether it's advantage, whether it's material blessing, whatever it might be.
Yes.
We have to learn that this is destructive on every level that we find it, personally, in a community, in a church, in an office, and in our society. Really, you can't have what we've had with the kind of neo-Marxist stuff going on in our society without real class envy in our society. And you know that really well. You see that.
Yeah. Well, I loved thinking that through in terms of the grid you give us in the book, in this new book, Envy, out with Moody? Is it with Moody?
Yeah, Moody Publishing.
Moody Publishing. I thought it was, and then I checked myself. It's Moody Publishing. It's November 2023. You need to pick up this book. And that societal chapter, it was such a rich chapter because that is what we have seen. We've seen this renaissance of Marxism in a new form, race Marxism in our time in the last few years. But really, Marxism is just repackaged, academicized envy, isn't it? Marx and Engels?
Yeah, that's the fuel of it. And then to say, okay, well, we can't just force this in an economic way, the way Marx and Engels wanted to, but you start to get this in the academy of the critical race theory that went on, the Frankfurt School, and all the things that you know about. You start to now see this everywhere in academia, right? In education. We now, you can start to think about giving trophies to every participant in Little League. We don't want winners. We don't keep score. But now when you're looking at really institutions of higher learning that don't even want to grade because grading now is somehow not, the equity is not the outcome, right? Equity is never going to be the outcome, right? There are differences that are true in everyone. Yes. I mean, we got to think objectively about this. And it's really hard for a plain person to rejoice with a beautiful person, right? Mm-hmm. Or someone who's strong or healthy and I'm decrepit and ill. It's just hard for us to do that. But at some point, God has to factor into this, right? You have to start to look at the sovereignty of God and God's dispensing of all things and be able to understand that God gives us life and breath and everything else, to quote Acts 17. Mm-hmm. There is that sense in which we have to see the connection of God's gifts. And as God sovereignly hands things out in various ways, there are certain things I just can't, some things are unchangeable. Yes. And I just need to get to the place where I accept the fact that God has given me a sphere, a domain, a place in which for me to live and rejoice and to make good with what he's given me. And if envy is ever creeping into that, it just destroys the whole thing. Mm-hmm. There's just this animosity, this kind of hostility, this angst that you have in society, which really, it all starts with the heart. And I start early in the book just dealing with, well, how is your heart doing? Mm-hmm. Are you really content, right? Do you love what you have, or do you love what you don't have? Do you start to resent people that have what you don't have? So it starts with this, that God's gift is to tell us don't covet. Because if you don't covet, you're not going to envy. Mm-hmm. And he wants us to live at peace and be able to say with Paul in Philippians 4, I've learned the secret of contentment, right? I can have a lot, I can have a little, right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, which is not a high school football verse, as you know. This is a verse about being able to say, I can accomplish all that God calls me to accomplish, regardless of what I've got in the bank account, regardless of how sick I might be, how tough it might be for me. And I just can't keep looking at people, throwing rocks at them because I feel like they have advantages I don't have. We can never have that flat-lined reality. We don't have it in any area of reality, of nature, of creation, and we're not going to have it in our human experience. And at your church, you're going to have a variety of gifts. Not all are apostles, not all are prophets. So to go back to 1 Corinthians 12, he's trying to say every part has its place, and we should rejoice in the pinky, we should rejoice in the earlobe, we should rejoice in the eye, we should rejoice in the chin. I mean, every part of the body has its role. And really, 1 Corinthians 12, and talking about those differences within the church, really driving toward contentment. You can see that, which really is the opposite of covetousness. And then if I have covetousness, jealousy, then envy, and envy is the worst and most destructive part, which I try to explore in this book. First half is exploring the problem, trying to identify it. And the subtitle, A Big Problem You Didn't Know You Had, that's where I'm trying to say, just give us a little bit of time to look at your life and my life, our church, our society, your office, your industry, and just, is it there? And then now, how do we fix it? Second half of the book is all about how do I fix it? What does the Bible say about this? And I just think this can be a super helpful thing. And here, let me say this. The early church dealt with this sin often. And the reason I wrote this book was because I couldn't find hardly any Christian books in the modern library that just tackle this problem. But you look back, church history, I mean, they were talking about it, right? John Chrysostom was preaching on it all the time. And I'm thinking in my sermon database, I got thousands of sermons. I couldn't find hardly any where I tagged the subject as envy. And I thought, well, how can that be? This was the sin that led to the first murder. It's the sin that put Jesus on a cross, humanly speaking. We've got to address this and uncover it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we don't talk about these kind of direct sins very often in the church, it strikes me. And one place, therefore, we don't have this conversation, you alluded to this a few minutes ago, is the ministry world. It's almost like if you go forward in chapel and Bible school or Christian university or whatever it is, and you commit yourself to ministry, you're almost going to not struggle with these kind of sins. You used to before your conversion, but now you're going into the pristine, clean, clear air ministry, and yeah, there'll be hardship and struggles, but that's not going to be. That's the ministry,
sure, right?
And it's and then you get into the ministry, and it's almost like it's a greater struggle there than it can be out in the world.
Yeah. Well, there are things we would probably not ever say on this podcast that you and I both know. Probably ministry is, it's a breeding ground for covetousness, jealousy, envy. I was just looking this afternoon, just preparing my sermon for the weekend, and looking at passages that just dealt with Paul addressing not non-Christians, but Christians as it related to backbiting, slander, envy, jealousy. The church is prone to this. And I think when you start talking about ministry and pastors and professors at seminaries, everybody's really concerned about the pecking order. Everyone's really concerned about, who's the boss around here. And when it comes to churches, it's church sizes and, publishing deals or radio or listeners or clicks or followers. And you've just got to say, well, wait a minute, what's driving this? And that's where I think that verse from Ecclesiastes is so helpful. So much work is done under the sun. It's just driven by envy. And you got to think, wait a minute, that's a sin, right? Do I really want my motivation to go to work today, particularly you guys like you and I, trying to serve the Lord directly by serving his people and being fueled by envy? It just seems so ridiculously stupid, right? Of course not. And yet, man, you and I know it's rampant in ministerial contexts. It
really is. And and then you find it in your own heart, hiding in there, and you realize it's not just the guys out there that you're battling, it's you yourself that you're battling. So a book that really in that kind of early church tradition, Puritan tradition almost, not to say that the book is written in that style, the ancient style.
It is not.
It's not. It's very modern in the style. But in terms of the piercing examination of the heart by holding up the mirror of the Word, it does a lot of work in the heart. In terms of that transition you make in the second half, you focus on love, you focus on taking stock of your sin. How does somebody listening to this in our last 10 minutes or so who recognizes that they have an envy problem, like I think basically everybody does, by the way, at some form, don't think in watching this or listening to this that you don't have this problem. I think everyone has this problem.
We do.
In some form,
yes.
I would say.
Yep.
How do we fight this? What are the steps? What's the What's the plan?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I do in every pastoral counseling meeting I have, if we start to identify a problem, I mean, we've got to confess our sins to God, right? Confession is such a great word. It's agreeing with God. And, you know, you and I both raising kids, I've raised mine are out of the house, but you know how hard it is just to get them to own it. Like, okay, this is, you've done wrong here. I just want you to own it. I want you just to parrot some words back. You got to accept that this is a problem and that you are responsible for the problem. No excuses, no rationalization, no justification. You're just saying, I did wrong here. And something as subtle as my feelings towards someone else, we can think, I'm just a victim to my feelings. I'm not responsible for that, right? And we've just got to get over that. The first step in remedying the problem is confessing and owning the problem. And God just takes delight in us confessing and forsaking our sin. And the first step is confessing, and then we can work on forsaking. But you've got to say, this is a problem. And I've been in pastoral ministry for, three and a half decades, and I don't think I've had anyone come to me and say, Pastor, can I make an appointment because I'm battling a sin problem, and it's envy, right? I got a lot of people saying, can I make an appointment to talk about this sin that's really gripped my life? But to them, it's going to be a sin that is an obvious thing. It's really causing trouble. And yet they don't realize these are the foundational sins, right? They were called in the early church, right? These are the core sins, the core vices. They're the 7 deadly sins. Envy was always a part of that list because we know it's a motivating sin. It's a root cause. So identifying, confessing, agreeing with God, owning it without excuse. Just like think of a kid, you got to think, okay, I want to own it without excuse. And then saying, okay, God, I want to learn to love like you do. And really, love is the thing that I think, we talk about it so much. We think it's a great thing, and it relates to the fact that God loves us. But we need to learn to love people the way that Christ did, right? Putting their interests before our own, right? Being able to say, really, it's not about me. It's not self-serving. It's not self-aggrandizing. It's not self-advancing. I'm not looking for accolades. I'm not looking for a reputation of being the pious person in the church. I want to learn to love. And love, a lot of that's done in private, which is I'm in prayer for those people, right? And I mean by yourself in private. I love people by praying for them every day. And if you think of the people that you are tempted to be jealous of, right? And then you think, I'm starting to get bitter toward them, so I'm getting envious toward them. If I said, I'm going to pray for them. I want to pray for their success like they were my own children. And God, teach me to love these people that I resent because they have more than I do, right? And some of us can't get away from those people because they're in our circle of life. And so we just need to pray for them. And I want to look at it like I would someone that I dearly love, and if I dearly love them, I want nothing more than for them to have more blessings from God, more fruitfulness in their ministry, better sales, better whatever they're doing. I want them to succeed at this. And so I would say that. And the other thing I would say, besides just learning to love them well, I just want to be able to recognize that a lot of what I think is going on in other people's lives is just a facade, right? Everyone has feet of clay, and I think some people have created this really challenging sense of, I can't love this person because they're so perfect, right? Their marriage is perfect, their life is perfect, their hair is perfect, their teeth are perfect. And it's like, it's not, right? Life is rarely what you think it is. Talk about, don't ever meet your heroes, because it will shatter your view of them. And I think it's true about the way we sit on the sidelines and we pine away with frustration and bitterness towards someone thinking their life is so good. When in reality, that's a lot of that is just a facade. Not that they're trying to be that way, but we don't post our worst pictures on Instagram, right? We post our best pictures, right? We were trying to make people, we're trying to present ourselves in the best possible way. And our world is filled with that. So I think even just giving yourself just a dose of realism and saying, listen, everyone, I just think of 1 Corinthians 10, everyone's tempted in ways that are common to man, common to people. So we've just got to get back to the place that all of us are normal people. And I think that's one of the reasons, must be, that God gave us the behind the curtain look at Moses and David and all these heroes in the Bible that you'd never find in other ancient Near Eastern text, but in the Bible we have stories of all the warts and wrinkles of all these people to remind us that, dude, we're all in process. To quote James 3, we all stumble in many ways, and so get off this kind of filterized view of everyone around you. Everyone's probably got a lot more problems than you think. And learning to pray for them and praying for their success and even finding out some of the ways they're struggling and trying to help them through their problems. You just got to get your eyes off of the comparison. And you can't compare unless your eyes are also on yourself. So forgetfulness about who I am and just really saying, how can I help you? How can I really serve you? And some people aren't good at that. They like to talk about themselves. They like to one-up stories. They like to constantly be comparing their lives with what they're saying. I just want us to learn to love as God loves by, first of all, recognizing the sin, replicating the love that I have for people, and just realizing that people are all people. I think that's part of it. There's a lot more in the book, but those are some of the simple things that I do in my own heart when I start saying, why am I not rejoicing at that guy's ministry or that guy's house or life or kids or whatever?
Yeah, a term you just used, forgetfulness. You could extend that slightly, self-forgetfulness.
Right.
That's a discipline that the church used to talk about in certain theological contexts that I think may be kind of lost in our day. We only have just a few minutes here, but very quickly, just putting in a word here with you, agreeing fully and loving it, the virtue of self-forgetfulness. There's a lot of work to do, counter with this and think this, and I love the prayer. I'm not going back on your advice. But one of the things we just have to do is just go, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm just too big right now. I got to just forget myself right now. It's not that you don't matter to God. I got to just disappear here.
Yeah. When I was a kid and couldn't sleep, I would go into the next room. My dad would be in there, and oftentimes late at night, it'd be the opening scene for the Twilight Zone. And the Twilight Zone, those 30-minute sketches, there'd be that big eyeball that, just you got to go back in time, look that up on YouTube and see it. I always think of that when I think the eyeball is like really affixed on myself, my eyeball. And what God would have us do is what Paul was so thrilled that Timothy could do, and that is to have a genuine concern with your welfare. And that was so surprising because Paul was surrounded by a lot of godly people, but he said, I have no one else like him, right, who has a genuine concern for your welfare. I just love that English translation of that text because I think that's what I want to have. I want to have a genuine concern for your welfare. And Paul said, I can't find people around me like that, but I got Timothy. I got no one else like him. He's so good at this. And I just think of that big eyeball just kind of working and disciplining itself to turn toward other people and say, I got to look away from myself, that self-forgetfulness, and say, I want to look to them. How can I love them well? How can I serve them? How can I make sure that their lives is going forward? I think that's Christ likeness, right? Yeah. That's being like Timothy. I want to be like Timothy. I'd like Paul to say that of me. I like my Paul to say that of me. Like, Mike really cares about people. He has a genuine concern for their welfare. He's not thinking of himself. And we see a lot of the Diotrephes. I want to be first.
Yes.
I want to be Timothy, not Diotrephes.
So the enemy of envy is servanthood.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Sure. Real servanthood with a genuine motive. I want genuine motives. I want a motive that's real and true. And not just, there's a lot, and this is why it gets back to our industry, right? People are serving a lot of times for themselves. They'll be in all kinds of service industries.
That's fair.
They'll be in ministry, serving. I mean, that's what the word means, right? Ministry. We're serving people. But in reality, it's got to be about recognition or reputation or some kind of accolade. It's just, I want genuine concern for your welfare. Or as Philippians 2 says, that's what Christ was, right? He laid aside all that he could have had, right, to come in the incarnation and be a servant, be found in the appearance as a man and a servant, all the way to serve, to expend to the place of dying on a cross. I'm going to go the extra mile, I'm going to stay the extra hour, I want to spend the extra dollar for the good of other people. And that certainly is going to include rejoicing with those who rejoice. That's love, and love does not envy. Well,
as we conclude here, you just have my wheels turning in so many directions. And one of them, to go back as we wrap, is that idea that is so foundational to wokeness and critical race theory, and it's that I'm a victim.
Yeah.
I'm fundamentally a victim of all these forces and factors. In fact, I'm not just a victim, I am oppressed actively at every minute by certain groups around me. And if you belong to those groups, you may not know me, know my name, but you are actively fomenting oppression against me at every second. And it's a little bit scary, Mike, that our college students and university students are being taught these kind of worldviews, it helps you understand just how poisoned the atmosphere is in this country in ideological terms. What we need to say as Christians and offer this as hope evangelistically and apologetically is, sure, people oppress each other, people wrong each other. That's a big part of what you're trying to say. There's real sin in our world. But fundamentally, don't think of yourself as a victim.
100%.
Think of yourself as an undeserving sinner who has been saved by God's grace, and then get out, as you've said, and turn that frown upside down, if I may, and start working to love people.
That's right.
And there's real freedom there.
So good. Yeah, agreed.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for being on this podcast. Everybody, I want you to check out Pastor Mike's ministry, Focal Point Radio, Focal Point Ministries.
You can go to pastormike.com. That's the easy way to get there.
That's the easiest way.
Yeah.
So go that way. Get this book, Envy. It's out right about now as we launch this this episode of the podcast. And thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Owen.
Appreciate it.
All right.